Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on post-processing. My name's Clare Perryman. I'm a software developer for D3PLOT and THIS. A few housekeeping points before we begin. Any questions you have will be addressed at the end of the presentation if we time allowing, so please put those into the questions box. So today's post-processing update is all about version 16, which was released by us on the 22nd of March. If you don't have version 16 yet on your machines, don't worry, you can very quickly go to our website and download it. So what we want to talk about as particular highlights from version 16 in D3PLOT, THIS and Reporter are listed here. There's a great focus on improved automation, making your lives easier, on getting higher quality image output, and of course, always more tools to be able to interrogate the data. I'm going to begin with talking about our D3PLOT features, then the THIS, and then the Reporter features. So model visualization, this is a huge change for, or the beginnings of changes in making it much better to create beautiful outputs. And I will demonstrate this using comparing Reporter, what we had, sorry, in D3PLOT 15 and 16. In D3PLOT 15, the first thing you can always do is use the lighting options to be able to change the ambient lighting. However, as you change that slider, you don't immediately see the image update. You either have to click on the Update Plot button or move your cursor over it. So particularly when you want to do something more sophisticated with positional lights, it requires a level of guessing what you want and setting it up each time. In 16, we've added the ability to use dynamic lighting, so it changes as you change those sliders. So if we go into that same menu again, the lighting menu, as I change this ambient light slider, we immediately get a response on screen. That's much more intuitive to change your model lighting to get that effect you want. The second aspect is being able to set up real world colors on your model. I'm just moving back to 15 here. So let's turn off that positional light and get my ambient light a bit stronger. And maybe I want that up as well. Of course, I have to update my plot to see it. Oh, I don't know my lights now. There we go. If we wanted to, say, color the car in real world terms, how we might do it is in 15, select the whole model, set some color, perhaps make it a yellow car, then proceed to click on individual parts and set them to being an appropriate color, having an appropriate transparency for glass material. I think actually, try that again. Okay, and so on throughout all the different parts of the model, and you have to set both these two things separately. We might then switch around to looking at the model on the side, reverse the wheels, right click, change the wheel properties to being black, and so on. It does take quite a while to set your model up to have that nice appearance. I think there's a couple of different screens on my windscreen there. In 16, we've introduced what we call the Material Attributes panel to make that whole process much quicker, also more easier to tweak things, change things, and easier to be consistent across your different images. The Material Attributes panel is accessed in the display settings as well. So there are three parts to the material attributes. You have the different materials available on the left-hand side. If we expand that tree, we can see that this is pre-populated in the install with a number of different materials, a few different paints. Then we have the central part shows what a property of a certain material is. I'm just going to expand the window so you can see that better. So for example, if I click on red metallic, I get a preview of that red metallic material. we have a certain brightness associated with it. We could change that if we liked. I'm just going to leave it about the default value, certain matte transparency value, and all of that is encapsulated in one thing. So here's our glass. We can now see through to the cube inside. We can see that we've got a pale blue transparency all parcelled together. On the right hand side is the part menu, allowing us to select parts. So let's now proceed to do the same recoloring of the model that we did in 15. In 16, just going to move that menu slightly to the side so you can see the model. I'm going to set a default. So if I right click on here, we see that I can do various things, including setting that as the default. So that applies a red metallic paint to my entire car. Already we've got something that's a nicer look and feel than we set up in 15, because we have all of that shininess involved within that material definition. Very quickly, with a few clicks, sorry, there's a number of different windscreens there. I'll start on the side window. We can set the windows, set up some tires. Again, I should quickly change my material to being a tire color. I've accidentally colored in some bodywork there as a tire, which perhaps that one could be some metal. Set up some nice let's do some nice chrome wheel hubs. Oh. And already we have a model that looks much more sophisticated in its appearance than what we were achieving in 15. Supposing now you realize that actually red metallic isn't really what's so popular now, we can very quickly change the shade. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to copy my existing red metallic and paste it into the paint category. And let's change our current default to being rename it orange metallic, just to keep our materials tidy. Into our palette, we pick a different shade. Say this sort of seems quite nice orange. How does it look applied to my model? Oh, I've changed the red metallic one. I'll leave that to change for now. I'll change the orange metallic, and I can come back later and tidy that up. And in my orange metallic, I might think, actually, I want something sort of slightly more moody lighting. We can change that here. We've got those dynamic lighting sliders, and I'm going to blank out some of these extra windscreen parts. I think it has a composite layered windscreen that I hadn't appreciated. I'm going to leave that alone. It's just going to be annoying. Okay, so here we have our Honda Accord, bar that windscreen that is refusing to play ball. I'm going to leave that be. We can put on some smooth shading. This is an option that's really valuable at the very last point of creating your image to get a really good lighting effect. The downside is that you can see now as I move the cursor over the screen, it's taking a very long time for D3PLOT to update. So you only really do it for that final image capture. At any point, you can disconnect the material attributes panel from your model by clicking here, and then we go back to seeing it with those entity colors as set up in 15. Of course, now that I've put this back to red as well, played around with my material attributes, it may be that I think that I want to save these out so I can use them again in a future session or share them with other people in my company. So everyone's cars can be this beautiful moody orange color. And that's really simple. You save out to an XML file. and at any point you're able to save it and read it back in. So that's one other very important point to say, is that yet at present you can't save the model to have these material attributes associated with it. So if you save this model and then reload it, it will have this sort of appearance here, and you'll have to go through that quick setup of assigning certain materials to certain parts again. That's something we're looking to improve in a future release. So back to the PowerPoint slides. That was a little bit about our material attributes. And here's some other models. This is the Honda Accord I was showing you, done a slightly different way, or the London taxi, where we've got some lighting going on, and it just shows the images that relatively quickly can now be put together. We've introduced further data components. One I particularly want to draw your attention to is the shell tension and compression. This now in D3plot allows you to contour whether a shell is untension or in compression, or indeed has no stress on it. It's available under the principal stress menu. As you can see, the red is for tension, the green would show no stress, and blue would show compression. If there is reasons why the shell surface can't be computed, it's contoured in grey, as with our other contouring where the material contouring where the data is not available. The next nice enhancement is displaying loads. So you can set up your loads in Primer, and that information is then available to you in D3plot, allowing you to see how your loads are affecting your model. It's important to just be aware that you do need to have a ZTF file in order to access this data. The ZTF file is information that's brought from Primer to D3plot. So here there's a list of some of the other information that your ZTF file will have. You'll need to have a ZTF file that's been generated using Primer 16 in order to access the loads data. So for example, if you display your loads, you can now see there are some load beams sketched up on from the entity panel and some shell loads. So how do we access them in D3plot? On the display options panel, there's the option to click on loads and then modify how these appear, whether they are set up with certain different arrow lengths. They're available to you. Loads are now available in all the object menus, for example, allowing you to blank them. Also in the quick pick menu, and importantly, you might need to look in the entity panel under the load section in order to originally draw them. You'll notice there's this is the list of the types of loads that you can bring through from Primer. So node, point and set, shell and shell set, segment, segment set, beam, beam set. Once you have your loads, you can contour up the force, moment, and pressure data. So here we have an applied force plot. The vectors are quite small, but you can just about see on the nodes here. A very popular request for a long time has been to be able to go home at the end of the day, save your work, shut down D3plot, and begin where you left off the following day. And we've now implemented that. So again, I'll show you this with a demonstration. So if I open up D3plot 16, here I have some little model here, and I'll also at the same time take this opportunity to show you another little cut section enhancement we've added. So you can put your cut section on, and actually I've already set it up. There's my Y cut section at a particular node. And you can set one side of that cut section now to be transparent, which is a really nice way of being able to still have some idea where you are in the model, much more than perhaps the outline mode gives you, without that being too prominent, and being able to sort of see through parts of it to expose perhaps interior parts of the model for data plotting. So if, say, I plot the von Mises stress, we see much more clearly what's happening on the right-hand side. The left-hand side gives a context. The main thing I'm seeking to demonstrate was, of course, the save and retrieve sessions. So perhaps I've now got to the end of the day and I want to shut down D3plot and go home. When I click on the close menu, another button comes up, the save session exit. So at that point, it prompts you to save out that session. Alternatively, under the file, there's also the session file option, and we can go in here and then we have a bit more control over saying exactly where we want to save it rather than it going to a default home area. So let's do a live demo where I save it to this folder here, apply, and now we can open up D3plot 16. I'll even close this session so we know it's not this one. Open up another D3plot. Also, the DSF file is automatically associated with D3plot, and on this open panel, it prompts me to, as well as read in a model, to read in a session file. So I can, at this point, read it in from here. This banner here goes green to show that it successfully found the model, because of course, sometime later, models may have changed or moved location. If that was no longer a valid model address, or you wanted to try and apply the session to a different but similar model, you could navigate on that browser and go and find a different model. So if we click apply, we'll see it runs through and brings us back to where we were with our transparent cut section and the same model view. If we look in the cut section panel, the same node number is being used. So that's really useful. As I said, alternatively, I could have brought it up by double clicking on the DSF saved session. We'll do that as well. Just so in D3plot, our crush model. And there's our DSF. It comes already associated with D3plot. Another way of accessing the same information. This is also in THIS, so I'll cover in the THIS section a bit of the preferences that are associated with that. I apologise, my laptop is definitely not the fastest computer for these things. And there we go. So that again could be the sort of thing where at the end of the day you take a saved session, reload it the following day. That covers the highlights I wanted to point out for D3plot. If at any point later on you want to find out more details or some of the other things that we haven't, smaller things we haven't covered in today's talk, you can always look at the What's New tutorial PowerPoint. This is the 15 one, and 16 one is in the same location for D3plot 16. So moving on to THIS, the things we want to cover for THIS are a lot of new features have been added to the curve table. It's already very powerful in THIS and has become even more powerful. We've added the ability to compute regression curves. Our displays has become better, so your curve is now anti-aliased. There's the save retrieve sessions option. And automation is so important, so we've continued to improve our fast DCS scripting and added lots to JavaScript. So I'll go into those now in a little bit more detail. So first of all, I'm going to bring up a new THIS section actually. And I'm going to begin this by reading in a session file that, in this case, my colleague has given me, that perhaps was the end of the work for him at the end of the day. So that's another way I think session files could be really powerful. He sent me his session file, he sent me all of his curve files, and again, under the file option, there's now a session file. You have the option to save or retrieve. I want to retrieve a session. Just give me a moment to browse the correct area. So he sent me this demo TSF file and this bunch of models, the crush model and the RT sled model. I can open up his session. Of course, his path names were slightly different, but I can very quickly edit his path names to be suitable for where I've got the model stored. So we want the crush model, run 1, the bin out, and the RT sled model. And having found 2 files that are correct, those turn blue, and I simply click apply. It churns away for a little bit, reading through all that data and beginning to work out how to set it up. It's doing some sort of fast TCF work in the background, but I don't need to worry about anything apart from that TSF file that has all of that information parceled into it. So now we've got his setup. I'm ready to start where he left off. What he's got is he's got a whole bunch of curves from Model 1 in his first graph and a second graph with a whole bunch of curves in Model 2. I'm now going to take the opportunity to explain lots of the new features that are in the curves table. So in the curve table is found underneath the curve manager. There's this innocuous looking button called table. It's very worth exploring if you are not already familiar with it. What you could already do in 15, which remains there and is very useful, is change and see which graphs are visible immediately on, which curves listed here are visible on which graphs. There's also groupings of curves. The Model 1 and Model 2 group are created automatically by THIS. So I can very quickly use these tick boxes to switch around which models I can see on which graph. As you recall, currently all of the Model 1 data is on graph 1, Model 2 is on graph 2, and by simply 4 clicks to turn some things off and turn some things on and an update, I've swapped those over. So that's the power where it comes to layouts. What's new, particularly, is all the curve properties. So I'm just going to expand my screen a bit to the right and move this slider along. You'll see I've clicked on the Curve Properties tab, and there's a whole bunch of different data values that come along, including things like HiC value and injury criteria. As I haven't computed any injury criteria yet, those values are not populated, and I can very quickly turn them all off at once. Those aren't relevant to me, and I can turn off other columns of data as well. So I'm going to decide that I'm not very interested in my min and max x data, nor my root mean squared or my number of points. At this point, if I knew this was how I would prefer my graph with, my table with quite a few, these few properties, I can save that to a preferences file. So that is always the standard way it loads for me until I save something different. Also, I can right click to hide columns and click on different columns as we can in other tables in our software to sort them by those values. Something that already existed in our software was the ability to filter the curves. So for example, we might just filter this curve table to only show the contact detail, the contact curves. And now we could change our top graph, which has components for Model 2 from a whole load of different contexts, to just show the contact detail. So I turn off all the curves in Model 2, then select these ones I'm interested in and turn them on again, update, and now I've just got my contact information. There is actually, or my master Y-force contact, a similar way of doing this that's already been in our software for a while, but people aren't very familiar with it. Really powerful, worth highlighting, and that's the auto blank function. This is, if you look at, click on it and look at the description, it uses a tab key to cycle through something. You choose what. So if we choose, in fact, cycle through the components, we set the auto blank to that option, and now I click the tab key in this window. So I click tab, I now see kinetic energy. I click tab again, internal energy, tab, partwise kinetic energy, and so on. We're now getting resultant forces, seatbelt forces, and the contact forces. So it's a really useful, quick tool to be able to pull your model data across and interrogate a whole bunch of curves that are all in one graph. So let's go back to our curve properties and deselect it all. Now I've got my properties tabulated, I can very easily compare across them, but perhaps what I want to do is to be able to put them into Excel and make use of the tools there, or export that data somehow. So I change to an Excel format, and let's save it one level up in the THIS directory. So we'll call it Clare's demo. Hit apply, and we see from the dialog window that it's successfully written that out. I move into the THIS area, and we can open it up and see it in Excel. So Excel seems to have decided that it doesn't want to come to life at the moment. When Excel comes up. In the meanwhile, I'll just show you another aspect for the table. I can reorder the columns as well by clicking and dragging. Oh, let's just swap component and style. You can see that happening there. So here's our Excel data, a copy of what we had in THIS with all of that, those columns that we asked for sorted in that order. Some other things that we have added to THIS's curve table in 16 are the ability to right click and do quite a lot more things. So we can now apply our functions from within the curve table, and we can annotate. So if I select, say, a bunch of these curves and right click on the max Y, I can annotate by the maximum Y. We see that color changes there, and on my graph, when I do an update, usually the annotation appears. So let's have a look at what we've got going on. Maybe that my options aren't appropriate. I do appear to be highlighting. Let's check the graph is visible. Okay, it's saying the graph isn't visible on graph 1. Oh, okay, I hadn't cycled through. Sorry, bear with me, I'm getting my X and Y's confused. If I tab once more, cycle through to the master Y-force, which is what we're seeing here, then we can see those annotations have appeared. And as I was jumping ahead to show, we can click in the annotate options, and that would allow us to change some things. So we can change off the highlight values. I thought possibly I had both highlight and display value turned off, which would have given me the invisible option, which isn't very useful. So another thing we can do is add a label. So I quite like it looking like that. Okay, so that covers the breadth of things this curve table can allow you to do. It's extremely powerful. If you're not already using it, I would heartily recommend using it and making use of some of those new features. As in summary, the features we have added in 16 are the ability to expand out all these curve properties, including the injury values, to be able to take that data and put it in a CSV or an Excel file, right-click and operate on curves, and right-click to annotate curves immediately from the curve table. Session files, I introduced you briefly to using a session file when I opened up THIS. The saving options are similar as well, so you can either click to save via the menu, save a session and give it some certain name. And when in the THIS session save, sorry, the text here is very small. I hadn't appreciated that. Let me just bump it up a bit. Oh, that doesn't seem to have entirely helped. So this gives you the option to either embed the curve data or the curve.csv file data into your session. The benefit of that is if your model data is no longer available or you're using someone else's data, you don't have to have access to the model when you read the session back in. There's disadvantages. If you don't have access to the model, you lose some of the ability to have all of this sort of entity data and to see all the read-in panes. So it's not always what you want to do, but it's very good in those situations. So I'm just going to simply save it in the simplest way without any of that embedded. At this point, I could go straight away and retrieve it again. And when I do retrieve, you have the option to scrap what you've currently got in THIS and open up this session file, or even keep hold of your existing session file and open the new session file on new graph. So it does allow you to sort of multiply up as well, the same operation in multiple graphs. When exiting THIS, you can be prompted and choose to save a session. At this stage, as it says in the text here, it'll save it to the home location, or as I'll explain in a second, something else that you can set with an OA pref. So when you save, you have the auto save, and you can set this in D3PLOT and THIS. This means that automatically, whenever you quit out of D3PLOT and THIS, it will save. You can change it from being the OA home to some other home area, so user-defined or your desktop. For THIS, those two embedding defaults can be set to be on instead of off by default. Likewise, or when you open up THIS to begin with, you're not prompted to open a session, but you can set THIS up to prompt you to open a session. While I'm on the topic of preferences, there's a couple of popular preferences that have been added to THIS, so I'll cover those as well. The HIC time window and scale factor can now be set in your OA pref file. That then you can put the auto hide on, which allows the top part of the graph to be hidden. Really useful if you're creating output, just reduces the amount of white space. Lastly, if you're someone who uses Windows and Linux drives, we now have the drive N supported in D3PLOT and THIS, which allows you to set up your drive mappings. Coming on to curve operations, the big new one we've introduced is the regression. So this is available in the operate menu on THIS. There's a little button down here called regression. There's a few different regression equations. You can have linear regression, a polynomial, logarithmic, or exponential. Once you've done a regression operation, you can click on that regression curve. So you see here it's a degree 3 polynomial, and underneath the properties, at the very bottom of that properties window, it shows us what the curve equation is. Also, in the properties tool, the regression curves can have confidence bands plotted. So here we have our black data fitted with a linear regression on the blue line and some confidence bands to show the strength of that bit. We've made our outputs display better in THIS. So curves are now by default anti-alias, giving this much smoother appearance and higher quality output. Next, I want to cover our 2 scripting languages in THIS and show the support we've been doing for that. We've been adding more and more to our THIS JavaScript over the last few years, and we've done a great deal of work in 16. So just to show you the 15 JavaScript compared to the 16 JavaScript and a couple of instances. So here's on our 16 manual, there's another 20 pages of JavaScript functionality. We've added a whole new class, the page class. This is to allow you to dynamically set up what graphs are visible on what pages. So now in JavaScript, you have a lot more control over creating high quality multiple graph outputs. We've expanded the graph class to match. So if we look back in 15, our graph class only really allowed you to say the total number of graphs and create a graph. It was very limited, whereas I actually think I'll need to zoom out a bit to show this. It's a bit, whereas now in 16 graph class, we have a whole bunch of different ways that you can put graphs on different pages, and pages of the graph properties have been exposed, which are then able to change things like whether the X label is on, whether the X max is set, adding some legends. There's just everything in there. So I recommend if you're a JavaScript user and want to increase your JavaScript usage in THIS, have a look at the manual. The group class has had some more good properties added to it, particularly being able to get the X values and Y, the X values at maximums and minimums over all the curves in the graph, these bunch of properties down here. So all the curves in the group. And the last one I want to draw your attention to is the read class. We previously just supported reading in THIS model data. So in the model class, there is still the option to read, which is how you read in some data. And you can either through there read in some different data, or in the read class, you can now read in CSV and curve file data, which is giving you the same functionality as available on the read panel on top of THIS. Echoing this functionality here. Our other scripting language is FastTCF. That continues to be something we support. So we've been supporting FastTCF in our software for about the last 20 years and are committed to continuing to support and develop it. It serves a different purpose to the JavaScript scripting. It's very simple and accessible if you're not already aware of it. Essentially, with a few button clicks, you can create and save a script to recreate what you currently have on screen. So for example, here, I can go to my FastTCF tool and simply go, okay, what do I want to create it as? I want to create it perhaps for all my graphs, and I can put out an output PNG and click apply. That will capture what I've currently got in my FastTCF script. We've added a couple of new, or there's a new thing that has been here for a while, is the ability to have variable output, so Reporter can access some of your values. And new for 16 is the ability to write entity names. Previously, curves were identified by their IDs rather than their entity names. So a quick comparison of this session is if I write out the FastTCF with the numbers, the old way, we just see part 1, part 2, part 1, part 2, contact 2, 3, 4. Whereas if the part name's available and the contact name's available, it's substituted that when I've asked for an entity name. Really useful if you have similar models set up, slightly different numbering, but with the same names used. Then you can have a FastTCF script that will work for both of them. There's a number of new things we've added to FastTCF, which I've just documented here. I'm not going to go into them in great detail. There's the ability to have user-defined red, green, blue colors, perhaps to color your different graphs, your different curves, sorry. You can easily set the y-axis ranges, and you can extract min and max values across all of the curves. So that concludes what I want to say about THIS. I'm now going to introduce you briefly to our updates in Reporter. Some of you may not yet be Reporter users. I will give you a bit of a flavour for what Reporter does. So the first thing I want to do is open up a existing standard template report. The standard templates in Reporter are really useful. Sorry, it's come off on the other screen. Now it's letting me drag it across. There we go. So this is the Euro NCAP front ODB impact assessment, and we've run this model, and this is a report that has been generated for a certain model. It has the driver on one side, the passenger on the other, and highlights to show what their injury scores were. In this instance, we can immediately identify the passenger had some poor performance for the head and the front leg. In this model, the passenger airbag didn't explode, so there were some serious issues, and the model scores 0 because it's unacceptable, as it says here, that if head, neck or chest measurements exceed the capping limits, then no points are awarded. As you go through the standard template, you then get a little bit more digging into the data a bit more. You have some graphs that summarize what happened. So in this case, we see some acceleration. There's a datum line showing what the criteria is for the standard. And for our particular model, we get the data, and it does a comparison between that. And similarly, you see here per our setup datum lines, and then how this model performed. Some of it reaching up into the red areas for the passenger. I'm not going to go through this, but I'm going to go through a similar standard template and setting that up. So a nice general standard template is for a vehicle model. When you run a standard template, it automatically prompts you to ask you to set up a set up the model with these little messages. So it'll ask me to find my keyword file. I'm going to do the Honda Accord model that we looked at in D3PLOT. So I open up the Honda Accord model, and we need to, in this template, it asks for, it in fact just shows some displacements of various parts, and I have to choose that part, either storing it in a CSV or setting it up on the fly in Primer the first time. So what I'm going to do is pick a couple of parts and a nodal reference frame. I'll see the messages come up to prompt me to do that. It's currently reading the model in. I downloaded these things so that they were local on my disk area in order to speed this up a bit. And in fact, I've cut down the analysis to just being part of the data run, so we won't actually see very impressive displacements. So I'm going to blank my window and select a couple of parts as if I was doing a sort of interested in the front intrusion. So have that part, perhaps that part as well. And we set up some reference nodes. So I'm just going to take some at the back of the car here. Hasn't zoomed in enough. Not being too careful about this. Then I save it as a CSV, so it would be accessible to me next time I ran my model. I then have to point it towards the results, which happen to be in that folder, and this images file that I recreated that it'll put its images in. It then runs off and generates a template. We see it brings up D3plot and reads the model in, brings up THIS, does some quick energy summary plots. Because being able to evaluate, so we considered that being able to evaluate the energy balance and looking at the before and after of how the model ran. It was a really good way to always do a model health check and check to see that your analysis has run successfully. The real strength of this template is that you can set it up to run by default after the end of any of your analyses, so that when you come in the following morning, you have a quick PDF file that you can look through, check perhaps to see your model runtime. What we have currently in our template is a good starter, but we encourage people to take those templates and make them adapted for their needs. We're nearly there, and it will then ask me how I want to save it. I'm just going to save it as the reporter template for now. One more plot to do. Actually, it has to contour up those displacements on those parts we chose earlier. So I will save it as a reporter OR file, give it some file name, and there we go. So there's the displacement plot on the last page. If we scroll up as well, we see right at the top, we can see some really useful summary data that likely things you'd always want to check after you've run your model. How long did it take to run? Some initial added mass calculations. Did it have a normal termination status? Then we've got, sorry, I should zoom out a bit to demo these. Got that energy balance plot from THIS and before and after shots of the model. As I say, I skimped a bit on how much data I pulled across, so it's not a very impressive change. And our displacement of our part. A couple more things to quickly demonstrate with Reporter. Something that has for a long time been holding our users back is the limited number of fonts that were available. We've now opened up to to have all the fonts on your system available. Of course, this comes with some variations that different people may or may not have. So previously, we just had Courier, Helvetica, Times, and Symbol. The reason for this is because it was available in all systems for all PDF writers, and all of your existing templates with those fonts, of course, will continue to work. But new to 16 is you can access this whole plethora of fonts very easily, changing fonts from one form to another. The disadvantage of doing that is different computers may have different fonts available. So we've supported that in THIS as well. THIS Reporter. So if, for example, I have this company called Cognition who have a very particular brand logo, and they've given me one of their reporter templates in order that I can add some data to it. However, when I open up the reporter template, it turns out the fonts on my system don't match the ones that they had. At this point, Reporter will prompt you to, with its best guess as how you should replace the fonts. I'm happy with those replacements, so I'm just going to say OK to that. And if I generate the report, oh, sorry, I should generate it first before I just switch views. There we go. There's our lovely Cognition change. We can, as before, right-click in the edit mode to change some fonts for here. Perhaps make this the Bauhaus font that was being used for the rest of the logo, so it looks a bit more consistent. Okay. While I'm here as well, another brilliant thing about this template is it allows us to shows what more we can do with tables. That's the other big change to Reporter. If you right click on this table here, we can now export it to Excel. You'll notice as well we've got lots of different colors going on, lots of different fonts, lots of different cell sizes, merge cells, and all of that gets saved into our Excel copy. So here's our Excel copy of the table exported from Reporter. And here we go, a carbon copy of those colors and those cell mergers. The last thing I want to show you is the ability that these tables now are linked to the JavaScript in Reporter. So once I've created some table, I can then insert a script item which operates on that table. The one I have in mind is going to, it's a bit of a fun final example to end on today. So it's called Lincoln.js. If we just have a quick scroll through, we'll see that it grabs our current template, our current table, and begins to do some operations on it. It'll keep prompting us with little messages that we say okay to, adding conditional formatting, and then it does various things to cells, merging them, changing their fill color, and so on. So let's generate our script, generate our report template, which will run our script. So the first thing it did is it can move a table. It can add rows and columns, resize those rows and columns, read some data in, and populate the table. It then applies conditional formatting to that data, so our different cells have been coloured differently according to the values in them. We might be able to see where this is going now, and merge and change our RGB values to this yellow-brown palette. And now we have Reporter's best impression of Abraham Lincoln. So that concludes our slides for today. So to recap, what we've looked at in Reporter is our standard templates, our new fonts, and our table enhancements. There's a couple of wrap-up items I'll do, and then I'll address some of the questions you've raised. So there are a couple of things I introduced today that you may not yet be using. If you haven't used JavaScript and want to know more, a good place to start is our script box tool. This is a repository of lots of JavaScripts that have been written, designed to be examples to get you started on scripting. We also regularly run JavaScript training courses, so have a look either on our newsletter or keep an eye on our training part of the website. There's none that advertised at present, but I know there are some in mind. If you wanted to learn more about some of our tools that was presented today, feel free to look in our past webinars, for example, at our Introduction to Reporter webinar. So now I will turn to our questions. I've got 3 questions. If you have a question and want to type in the box, that would be great as well. So some of these I will make. If you color a model with a material attributes panel, could these colors be saved to properties file? So at present, they cannot be. That's a limitation of the material attributes. It may be that that's a way we go about implementing it. We haven't decided yet. So that will be a 17 feature. There are a few things the D3PLOT sessions don't save, such as deform transformation and movie background calculation points. I'm sure the intention is to expand the session files where possible to support those. So I will take that and log it as an enhancement if we haven't already filed that away. Thank you, Pedro. Lastly, are you able to read group files into this via the JavaScript API? That's a good question. I don't immediately know the answer to that. And if we can't at present, that would be a good thing to add. I wanted to search in the JavaScript area. I don't think a find and search is going to be the way to go. I would expect it to be either in the read class or in the group class. Or in the model class. I can't see it there immediately. I'll log it as enhancement if, or get back to you if it turns out we can do that. And I guess at present, what you can do is manually read in and create a group, and then use the get from ID feature. Actually, there is a get group. I think that's again assuming that you've already read it in. Okay, thank you all very much for your attendance today. Our support details are on the screen here, so if there are further things you wish to contact us about, please either contact your local Oasys distributor or email our support desk at dyna.support@arup.com. Thank you very much for your time and enjoy your afternoon.